Welcome everybody to this Ethics Talk live on human rights in practice. My name is Anna and I'm here with Nina. And we are super excited about this live talk. We are going to spend 1 hour diving into the fairly complex but so important world of human rights. And this Ethics Talk Live is hosted in cooperation with DLA Piper, and we are here in my speaker studio in Espoo in Finland. We have a lot of snow here today, but are happy to be inside. It's warm here. But with that, Nina, what are we going to talk about today?
Yes, so we thought that last time when we talked about the human rights and corruption, we thought that it's such an important topic, so why not spend a full episode on Ethics Talk Live on the human rights issues? And we are so happy that today we are going to have 4 professionals in this field who have very great experience in working with human rights issues from various angles. And these super people are going to spend an afternoon with us, so we are looking forward to that one. And the questions that we thought that we're gonna have this conversation on relates to many aspects, but we want to give you something very practice oriented. So we'll start by talking about human rights compliance programs, so how to design a program that actually has an impact and doesn't just look nice on the paper and in the reports, but actually has an impact. We'll also look at the human rights aspect from the regulatory perspective. So how will actually the forthcoming regulation look at the human rights due diligence, and especially how will the enforcement look like? So will there be similar type of fines as we have seen in the data privacy, trade sanctions and anti-corruption area? And lastly, we are going to talk about how can companies actually collaborate with the human rights. So we are using a lot of external service providers and audit partners to actually help in the due diligence process. So what should we think about that? But Anna, could you introduce our guests?
Yes, I would be happy to. So as Nina said, we are so honored to have with us 4 super experts in this field. So we have with us actually here in the studio, Salla Tuominen from DLA Piper. And Salla, we have been working behind the scenes with Salla for over a year now with these Ethics Talk Lives. And we are very, very honored to have her with us here on the stage, and she will talk a bit about the regulatory perspective in a while. But Salla, she is passionate about good governance and compliance, and she represents DLA Piper's Nordic offices in sustainability and ESG. And she's also an advocate for human rights and inclusion, and she's responsible for this work in the Helsinki office. And then our keynote speaker today is actually a person, we could not think of a better person to be a keynote speaker for an event like this. We are honored to have with us here today Parul Sharma. I don't think I have to introduce Parul to you, but she is a true veteran in this area. And she makes human rights very real and tangible, not only through her own personal example, but she's worked extensively with corporations on these topics. She's worked with human rights and anti-corruptions in high-risk markets for the whole career. She is CEO at the Academy for Human Rights in Business. She's chaired the Swedish Governmental Agenda 2030 delegation, and she's a chairperson now of Amnesty International Sweden. She's constantly ranked as one of the top leaders within this area in Sweden. She's written numerous articles and books, so you see why we are proud to have her here with us today. But then we also have 2 company representatives. And as Nina said, we want to keep this very practical and tangible, hands-on. And we will hear from 2 companies that have done a lot within this field. We have Annika Ramsköld with us from Vattenfall. She is heading the sustainability work at Vattenfall, and she's done that since 2014. And Annika has a very interesting background because she has worked at Vattenfall for over 30 years in various roles, such as R&D, business development. She's been in sales, she's been in trading, marketing, she's worked with their strategy. So she really knows the company from inside and out. And during the last year, she has been very engaged in updating their human rights assessment. And I'm sure she will share a bit about that. And now they are actually working on how to integrate these results throughout their business operations. Then we have with us Greg Priest, and Greg, he is working at Inter IKEA, and he has over 20 years of experience within this field. He's a core figure in the development of IKEA's sustainability strategy, which is called People and Planet Positive. And Greg, he is in his current role working both on a very practical level. So he's setting the strategy, working with the business operations to really integrate human rights aspects in everything that IKEA does. But he's not only working on a practical level, but also on a policy setting level. He is very engaged in IKEA's external stakeholder engagement on human rights. And he's working really to influence positive change also through regulation, legislation, standard setting, and so on. And I think that's a good reminder for all of us that the work with human rights, it is very practical, but we shouldn't forget the policy level either. And that's how we will start the talk today. We will have Parul giving a keynote talking about practical aspects, her lessons, and then we will have Salla describing the regulatory perspective for us. And then after that, we'll open up for just a discussion. So fire off your questions in the chat, and please be as interactive as you usually are. Anything else practical, Nina, that I forgot?
No, I think that's it. I think we're ready to let Parul to lead the show.
So Parul, great to have you with us.
Many, many thanks. Thank you very much, Nordic Business Ethics Initiative, dear Anna and Nina, for this beautiful keynote opportunity on a very crucial topic. I believe you have my slides. Right, here they are. Many, many thanks. So friends, again, it's a great pleasure to be with you, and let us just start. Human rights and business. Well, to start off, human rights atrocities, violations, or human rights negligence are most often triggered by another unjust or fraudulent behavior, abuse of power or weak governance, lax management, or even fear of management. This realization is extremely important as it prepares us for a cause and effect reasoning, a cause and effect analysis as part of the due diligence requirement in the upcoming EU legislation. As you can see, one probable requirement under the new law will be due diligence and the ability to identify, address, and remedy the corporation's impact on human rights and the environment through their value chain. I think in this context, it is important to highlight Agenda 2030. In 2015, all UN member states agreed on this common agenda called Agenda 2030, or the UN Sustainable Development Goals, if you wish. For the first time, the world agreed on a framework indicating that sustainable development is more than certain environmental standards, which is usually how you define sustainable development, or which is usually how you understand sustainable development, at least in the Western part of the world. Terms such as interlinkages and cogwheel analysis, interdependence started to be used. A more holistic opportunity was born through Agenda 2030, and the tendency to separate social and environment sustainability became much lesser, and we can see the results today very much, especially in the reasoning around sustainable development, which I'm very happy about. Now, how human rights and other ethical areas are interlinked. This particular understanding will help us deal with a proper due diligence analysis. One such cogwheel or interlinkage is the one between fraud and corruption and overall sustainable development, and in particular with human rights in business, which I will refer to in a moment. Ban on import of products linked to severe human rights violations, such as forced and child labor, is one major area within this upcoming legislation. And it is worthwhile mentioning the Global Slavery Index's figures, which indicates around 40 to 50 million modern-day slaves. And as per other reports, this is only the tip of the iceberg. National reports from India, Pakistan, Latin America, and the MENA region show much higher figures. And as Global Slavery Index, modern-day slavery is strictly linked mainly to our value and supply chains. In my work, modern-day slavery has been found in 6 out of 10 heavy industry supply chain audits, for instance, within foundries, mining, building, and construction. However, this far, the main reporting, official and NGO-based, has been within agriculture and modern slavery. But it won't be an exaggeration to say that modern-day slavery is the fastest growing human rights concern within the area of business and human rights. It is also important to keep in mind that around 75% of modern-day slaves consist of women and girls, both within flesh trade and forced labor trade. The main, or one of the main purposes of this upcoming EU legislation is human protection as a core within human rights due diligence. This core principle will now force corporations to build competencies and abilities within risk awareness, risk analysis, and risk management. That is, risk awareness, risk analysis, and risk management. Within these 3 abilities, you will find the necessity to understand cause and effect, meaning how any bent business behavior may actually cause a human rights violation. And of course, the other purpose is to create a level playing field for corporations. If you may slide to the next slide, please. Well, a bit on the interlinkages between human rights and fraud and corruption. The Academy for Human Rights in Business, and also my personal work before the initiation of the Human Rights in Business Academy from 2007 up till 2019, that is just right before the pandemic started, we have conducted over 250 sustainability audits. In 97 out of 250 audits, severe fraud and corruption cases have been determined. These are either business to business, business to government, or both, or even purchases to suppliers, or supplier to labor departments, and or environment departments. Now, what is important here from a human rights perspective is that 60% of the fraud and corruption cases affected mainly the female workforce in the production units, in the supply chain, or in the value chain. And that could be noted through a grave exploitation of female workers, a non-payment of female workforce, the overall working conditions, meaning lack of water and sanitation, lack of toilets, lack of regulated working hours, and generically health and safety issues. The rest, around 40% of the fraud and corruption cases, concerned land, water, emissions, pollution control, certifications, and permissions on various environmental and climate records. One clear conclusion in my work the past 10 years is that inculcating regular knowledge and training for global suppliers, especially based in high-risk areas, is far more efficient than audits. Reports from PricewaterhouseCoopers and KPMG show the same response. However, this does not mean that audits are useless, but only that trainings, whether there are cluster trainings or individual trainings of suppliers, show a much more steady and comfortable result within human rights and also overall sustainable development. The Ernst & Young's Global Integrity Report from 2022, a very fresh produced report, with a sampling of 54 countries and 4,700 respondents, confirms that over 55% of corporate integrity and ethics work have slowed down or been under-prioritized during the pandemic. The same report over the years has confirmed that fraud and corruption within supply chain is one of the highest risks within a company's integrity work. And what negligence within supply chain can do to human rights is partly seen on this slide. Another worrisome sampling shows that in 8 out of 10 cases, companies still invest furthermore in communication and PR surrounding sustainable development and even human rights than competence and resources within their purchasing departments linked to sustainable development. Some suggestions based on what has been said this far, since Anna underlined, we are here to be hands-on and to have some sort of a guiding attitude. I will try my best now to conclude certain suggestions and recommendations for further discussions. Human rights is a complex discipline, as also was underlined by Anna and Nina, and entails a lot of varied areas from water and sanitation, minority rights, harassment, anti-discrimination, forced labor, slavery, child labor, women's rights, labor standards, right to livelihood, etc., etc. However, recent studies shows that Western companies, and in particular Northern European countries, mainly regard human rights as a risk for child labor in their operations. In fact, our studies show that 7 out of 10 companies believe that human rights and child labor are synonymous. What are the main recommendations for corporations today in view of this upcoming legislation then? Well, as I explained, the main purpose of this upcoming EU legislation is human protection as a core within human rights due diligence. This core principle will force operations to build competencies and abilities within risk awareness, risk analysis, and risk management. Within risk management comes aspects such as remedy, follow-up, hand-holding, control, and verification. Hence, competence building within human rights for key departments and key managers within board of directors, purchasing, strategy, sales, and middle management becomes extremely crucial. This will be regarded as a part of a company's internal due diligence. Increase the hand-holding ability towards customers, vendors, and suppliers in the area of human rights, and the ability to follow up contractual demands within human rights and environment. For legal departments, there must now be a new look on contractual requirements with very new glasses, especially for high-risk suppliers posing a risk within any area of human rights or environmental standards. A much greater collaboration between legal, compliance, purchasing, and sustainability departments is something we are strongly recommending. Companies now need to provide training and practical guidance to increase the knowledge and capacity of their suppliers alongside a stricter contractual obligation to adhere to. We must now look at the development of innovative solutions for follow-up in collaboration with the suppliers, and also include non-profit organizations, NGOs, for instance, or other civil society organs that are experts and present in high-risk and complex markets and have special knowledge within the specific area of human rights you are looking into. Friends, that was me for 10 minutes, which were the strict instructions I had for this keynote. And I guess we will be able to discuss even further in a while. Thank you very much.
So next, I promised to give a short regulatory briefing on the similar subject. As we know, there have been for quite some time already various kinds of soft law instructions or guidelines on this very topic of business and human rights. However, the legislation has not yet been very successful. And even though that during the last years also some legislation has been put in force, such as Modern Slavery Act in the UK, same in Australia, in certain states in US, now in Germany, France, etc. However, the legislation is so far still quite fragmented. It's typically only covering certain sizes of businesses, so it's not really for all of the companies to comply with. And only the mandatory due diligence on human rights is really implemented in France so far. So there has been a lot of pressure to be put on European Union on the regulation, and as Parul just described, we are expecting something to happen very soon. Last year, European Parliament adopted with a large majority resolution on the corporate responsibility and accountability, and in that case it was heavily stressed that while it is duty of the companies to respect human rights and the environment, it is for the governments and the states to protect human rights and environment, and that should not be outsourced or transferred to the private actors. The planned regulatory regime would be applied to all companies regardless of the size or the fields where they operate, which would be something new in this field. This proposal should be brought soon to the Commission and forward, and that this is of course something which has been postponed for a few times and has been also gaining some criticism that what is it about, why it is taking so long to take this matter forward. Remains to be seen what it will be. It will be of course exciting to see. Here in the Nordic countries, there have been discussions on this topic too. Lately, Norway is the first one to implement the law, which will enter into force 1st of July this year. There have been also discussions in Denmark, but not progressed so far. Let's see what will happen. In Finland, the current governmental program includes a study to be taking on potentiality to enact a new law of corporate social responsibility, and that has been prepared through various studies. First of all, with about the legal framework, and secondly about how the Finnish companies so far in practice are dealing with the human rights. And it seems to be that human rights as such are kind of respected and recognized, but there is still a lot to do really to embed the human rights into the practice of the business operations. And then it's also a question about how the companies could improve the reporting and communications about the human rights and how they are dealing with them. So the main themes in the planned Finnish regulation is that the core is really that the companies are required to exercise the duty of care, and how it will be then conducted, that would be in practice through due diligence, to the most extent in the same principles as is now planned in the EU regulation. However, we don't really know yet what will happen. Currently, the Finnish Minister of Economic Affairs and Employment is carrying out an assessment report, and it will be then taken from there. We do not yet whether we will have a new regulation of which is only for the Finland, or whether Finland would follow the the EU first, see what is arising out of the EU regulation, whether it will be a new law, totally new law, or whether some currently available laws would be amended and fulfilled and supplemented. Remains to be seen, really. In my own personal opinion, I would think that the harmonization in this area would make sense. This is subject about universal rights, so harmonization would be beneficial. And also thinking about international corporations, I think it would be very much beneficial for the companies to be able to understand the content of the law from one specific area and not from various jurisdictions as the current cases. So I am very much in favor of seeing harmonization during and about this topic to happen, but it really of course remains to be seen, and the next few weeks are actually very exciting. We will see the report from the ministry here in Finland in February, and thereafter also understand more about the European Union and the planned regulation in the coming weeks and months. So exciting times regarding the themes of business and human rights.
Great. Thank you, Salla, so much, and thank you, Paru, so much for the starting of this conversation. So I think we are ready to start the panel discussions. Do we have Annika and Greg online?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone.
We do. Hello.
Hello. So nice to have you there. Now we can see you also here in the studio. So we'd like to ask Annika, you to start by reflecting on your views on the human rights issues. So this floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And well, what I want to first start with is, of course, like human rights is different from a lot of other topics that companies look at. Because in particular, if we talk about risks, from usually then the company talks about what is the risk to us as a company. Whereas when we talk about human rights, you need to have the starting point is the risk towards humans and different human rights. And then that can be different, and it is a different approach for companies to look at it that way. For a company like Vattenfall that now have been talking about that sustainability is the business, something we've spoken about for 5 years now. For us, if we start looking at and really having human rights at the center, it will in the end also be very good for the business. It is a journey that you need to be on in order to get to that point and to realize that it is good business to also look at human rights. And to illustrate this, I would like to share a slide that just says that to work with human rights, it's not an easy fix. You need to realize that it takes time, and you need to gradually build things up. And I also think it's important to dare to focus. So you need to really continuously build your story. So if we look at this slide, it's just to illustrate that, Anna, you were very nice and kind to say that Vattenfall have come quite far. But I think then we need to remember that our journey started already back in 2003 when we did the first sort of CSR report and specifically started to talk about what is human rights, how do you work, and starting to defining those topics. And then we needed to recruit specialists that could work on these topics, to then also set the governance, the internal sort of steering. We start nailing down policies. But again, my key message is you need to start small. You need to start with your key things, but don't believe that you can fix everything at the same time. So that's also why I said we start with some governance, then we get the resources by putting in specialists. We then perform trainings. We start putting some governance topics in place. Then we do deep dives and pilot tests, sort of how do you do your due diligence process. So already back in 2009, for instance, we did a human right due diligence as part of when we started sourcing biomass. So you really need to do things gradually. And then you can, based on the experiences you have, you can extend your governance, you can train more people. And then for our case, we know that our biggest parts are related to supply chain. And that's why we started by looking at suppliers and others. But then you can see that we put in energy poverty. We realized that our customers are also important. And then we started looking into that. So we had also an overall mapping where we have our biggest risks. But then you gradually need to take the most critical ones, you tackle those, then you continue with the next. So it's very much a continuous journey. And then, as you can see, then we expanded, we recruited more people, we firmed up more of the governance. Way back, we only had a code of conduct. We had then a special code of conduct for suppliers. We then started talking more about human rights, and it was not only a part of a sustainability policy, but we put specific statements on what is human rights for Vattenfall. That statement was then turned into a policy, and then based on the policy and overall screening with external support as well as internal support, we started making an action plan for how do we continue this journey to integrate human rights even further. And then we have specialists. We really talk about that human rights is not something that the staff function is fixing. Human rights is part of the responsibility every business area has. They are responsible for their sustainability topics, meaning they are responsible for human rights. But then we are there helping to guide them and give them the expertise. We train them, we help to define processes, etc. But as you see, it's very much about an iterative process. You identify your most critical or salient issues, you start fixing them, then you go to the next, and then you go to the next, and then you go both broader and deeper. So even if Anna very nicely said we've come far, we're still only early on the journey, and we just need to continue going broader and deeper. I think I will stop there.
Thank you, Annika. I can see you're really passionate about this topic, and I think that's what needed to go both deep and broad. But Greg, what's your take? Some reflections, initial reflections from your side on human rights and business.
Yeah, and again, thank you very much for the invitation, and it's so fantastic to see so many people joining. Such a great topic, really combining all the themes that we're going to build on today. And maybe to back up a little bit, as you said, I'm part of Inter-IKEA. It is the Inter-IKEA group. So when we talk about that, we talk about, I hope everybody is at least fairly familiar with IKEA. We talk about our product design, development, the sourcing of our products, but also our franchise system and our retail operations through our franchisees. So we really talk about the full value chain. And I think that's really important as well, is because so often when we talk about human rights from a business perspective, we talk about supply chains. And we really are talking about the full value chain, from supply, sourcing, all the way to transport, distribution, our own retail operations, the products we develop, and then the responsibility into customers' homes and, hopefully back in a circular formation after that. But maybe to back up again is, we talked about the mindset, and Annika and Parul both touched on it, this changing, from a risk base to the company to the impact, the risk that we have to people throughout the value chain. And it's a really important one to be continually working with. There is also from a business perspective, to really work on demystifying human rights for people working in the business. Quite often we're talking in very theoretical terms, and it's not to overly simplify it, but it's to put it into really concrete and specific terms for people working in the business. What does this mean for me and my function? How do I impact it? When we did this past year and a half, actually, we took a really deep dive into our business, and we did something we refer to as a human rights baseline assessment. And in that, we really, looked through every process that we have, every way of working, everything through the business to really identify how have we integrated human rights into it, and then looked at, where are the gaps? Where do we have to improve? Because Annika touched on it. It's a never-ending process. You're always working on it. Business is changing. Our, scope is changing. The areas where we work is changing. So we really need to be, work at it not only in a systematic way, but a systemic way throughout the whole business. And then touching on that, really the importance of awareness, training, but competence development into the people who are really working in the business. I think our function in human rights and sustainability really supports that, but you really want the people who are working in the business to be competent about, in it. And to come back to what Harul was talking about is really, what are the elements of human rights due diligence into this that we want to integrate? It's, the policies, the government, the standpoints, but, how do we do that through prevention, mitigation, training, reporting, continually, and always working with it. And Annika, I feel for what you said there about, we've done a lot, maybe we've come a long way, but we have, we are always, being humble in that, we continually need to work with it. But that shouldn't be, stop anybody from getting started. I mean, we're all on the same path, the same journey. So we continue that. Yeah, let's.
Perfect. Thank you, Craig. So we promised to be practical. I think we have a very good question here in the chat that is practice oriented. So Nina from Finland is asking us a question, and I think any of you can answer this one. So feel free to start, any one of you. So Nina is asking that, what do you see as the best way to conduct the sustainability or human rights audits? Is it more like an observation and interviews during the visit, or do you have any specific frameworks that you could maybe mention? And Nina is helpful for any support or ideas in this area.
I mean, I can start, but I know Parul is definitely the expert here. But I think, to me, just first to reflect, let's not get hooked on doing audits, but I would much rather start broader, sort of saying, where do we have the general impact? So the first starting point should always be, look at your full value chain in the company or organization where you are at. Then identify, where do you have your risk elements, or where are human rights at risk? And then you start tackling those where you have the highest risk. If you then go into as one part of seeing, how do I get more knowledge about the actual impact, and what are the things that we need to work with in order to improve the situation for humans, then you can do an audit. But an audit is only a tiny part of that work. And the audits, you can have those professional audits going in there, and of course then they perform a number of interviews, and they have their checklist and they walk through that. But I would say a lot of the things, and here Parul should really talk about her experiences, it's not really the actual thing you do in that checklist or the questions you ask. That's not where you get the true answers. It's by being very observant, looking at what's happening around. It's about talking to other stakeholders to the actor that you're auditing. So again, you can have a good system to do the audits, but I would much rather do, I didn't specifically talk about that, but we did, for instance, what we called a human rights risk assessment connected to Colombia, where we sourced coal. And that was interviewing 54 different stakeholders. It was governmental representatives, it was NGOs, international NGOs, local NGOs. It was then, of course, also talking to the actual companies and visiting them. But that was such a tiny piece of getting that full picture. And then we did an action plan and had the dialogue with the companies on how they could do. We could also act to bring stakeholders, both local authorities, NGOs and companies, to the same table, discussing these are facts and you can have different views on it, but how do we tackle it? How do we solve it? That was a long answer, but still, I felt that I wanted to add, because don't get stuck in the audits. That would be my very key message.
That's a great answer, Annika. Thank you. Parul, would you like to add something very quickly?
Sure. Absolutely. Very quickly, I completely 1,500% agree with Annika. There's also a hype around audits nowadays, or the past 15 years it has been. Auditing has in itself become a heavy industry, to be very honest. But that's a separate topic. I think a mix, as I also said in my keynote, studies show that hand-holding education and ability building and competence building by the hands of the purchasing company towards the vendors and the supply chain has much more stable effects than auditing. What we are seeing is that auditing is just a self-fulfilling instrument where you audit and then you audit again and then you audit again. That's basically what we see today, with very little development in the heavy and harsh realities of human rights in the supply chain. Whereas when you do hand-holding and competence building with your business partners, for instance, with your suppliers or vendors, you do see that there is a greater amount of partnership building taking place, and a togetherness in business, which is also much better for the business as a whole, for both parties. So auditing is indeed a very limited part of the verification process. I would say that sometimes auditing can have a counter effect where you actually risk provoking your business partners rather than helping them. Within business, we are used to talk about transfer of knowledge. Look at business and human rights and sustainability issues as a transfer of knowledge, meaning when you yourself has obtained the knowledge, the ample business knowledge related to these areas, make out a strategy to build the same within your business partners, in this case with vendors and suppliers, I would say. But training and transfer of knowledge is much more a solid way of working in this area.
Could I add? Still very quick.
Of course.
Yeah, let's not stick for too long for this issue. And I guess these audits could be a one session of their own. But really agreeing with everything what Annika and Parul already said, but also noting that sometimes these audits can also be as a starting point, really. It can also be kind of a wake-up call to the organization in cases where the human rights aspects haven't really been at the table. So in that sense, I would say that they can serve or some beneficial issues and can really also in a way educate the personnel to understand that perhaps we should pay attention to this and this issue a little bit more, but that's what we have recently done. So in a way, I see them that they can be really beneficial too.
Exactly, that's a great addition.
Yeah.
Can I just?
Just
the one thing going through all of this, I think, is that we talk about the type of relationship you have with your suppliers and your business partners in total. A short-term relationship is not going to build trust. It's not going to build development in any way from a business perspective or a sustainability or a human rights perspective. So I think, where I think we're very proud is, the relationship we have with our suppliers is on average 11 years, 12 years, which, gives you time, and many much longer than that. It gives you time to develop this, to build the trust, to build the understanding of what you're trying to achieve. And that will strengthen an audit process, a verification process, and a development process. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's really, I mean, comes across here when listening to you, and that training, as you said, training, education is so important, because it is so easy to sort of think that, okay, we'll put a supplier code of conduct in place, and then we'll outsource the auditing to a company, and then we're done. And it's so much more. And I think that's so great that we can have a discussion like this as well, to share and learn from each other. But I was thinking, Salla, and thank you again for the overall briefing on the regulatory perspective. Now, when there is a greater responsibility put on companies, it's good. You specifically pointed out that companies should respect, governments should protect, so that can't be outsourced. But still, it seems a bit that when we talk about human rights in emerging markets, difficult countries, not to point out any specific country, but still, as a Nordic company, as a European company, it sort of becomes our problem to fix that issue. So how do we really deal with this?
It's a good question. It's a very complex question. Of course, one issue is the regulation. But one can also ask if the regulation is really the correct tool, and does it really benefit to, or does it really have implications to the root causes, and not just being a kind of a band-aid to fix something, and everybody can be happy that yes, we did our part, but does it really have those implications what we would like to see? So it is a good question. What would be the other tools to get there? There have been these, as mentioned, these soft law instructions, guidelines, principles, whatever. We haven't gone too far with them. There are certain limitations, of course, what comes to the kind of a self-regulation, and the progress hasn't been really there. So it's of course a good question whether the regulation then is it's correct tool for the companies. However, in addition to the regulation today, as you also mentioned, it's not only about the regulation. It's a kind of a general understanding of the sustainability, how it has arisen, the awareness of it has risen in the community. The shareholders, investors, employees, contract parties, partners, etc., are expecting more and more from the companies. In a way, when companies of course putting a lot to the communities, it is essential that also these human rights aspects are put more and more pressure also on the companies. So in that sense, I find it is important, and it's essential. And it's not only it's also about making wise business decisions because of understanding what is right. It's of course about the risk awareness, not to end to endless long legal disputes. It's about recruiting. The current times of a war of talents, recruiting people who want to work with you, work for you. It's about reputation. It's all of that. But then it's of course a good question that if we only put pressure on the companies, is it so that it's seen that, okay, the companies will take care of that? And that shouldn't, of course, be the case. It's about us, human rights. It's about human rights, and it's about the human beings. And it comes back to the very basics at the end. So it's not just that the company should do that. It's also, of course, the society overall, but the companies should do their part.
Yeah. No, I think that's complex in a sense, but I think, as you said, we have to do our part. And Greg, if I could, I know you are pretty passionate about regulation and active sort of. I said you are also working on a policy level. Could you just comment a bit from your perspective why I assume you think regulation is good?
Yeah, I mean, John Ruggie, who was the authored the UN Guiding Principles, spoke about a smart mix of regulation and other instruments to help drive human rights due diligence forward and respect for human rights forward. I think we can argue whether we've achieved a smart mix yet. Maybe it's a little bit elusive, but I think there is a real space for it. We've been very made clear statements about our support for good human rights due diligence. We think that not just leveling the playing field, which many companies point to, but I think driving a movement. When you look across the value chain, you see many companies. You see the brands, of course, that are customer facing, but all the way forward and backward are made up of individual companies, each of which has to take its responsibility. And if we can have clarity on what the expectation is and how we report against it, how we work and how we act together, then I think we can really have movement. It is this development process. So I think there is a real space for that. And I think there are other progressive companies and many others that feel that way. Now, having said that, we do need harmony across jurisdictions. We highlighted a few already today. Norway, Germany coming, the Netherlands coming, we have the UK, we have Australia, we have plus, each of which, its own take on it, a slight different level of requirements for reporting. And reporting and transparency is what we want to get to, but to make sure that, we have a common movement, common expectation is really important. So good, directives in the EU, we think can help that. We'd like to see a little bit more speed now in the process to come to fruition. But we think it is something that's needed and can be positive.
Thanks, Greg. I think we have a great question again in the chat. So this one is from Patrick from Sweden. And by the way, Nina is thanking for the great answer to her previous question. So thank you for that one. So Patrick is asking that how to start better integrating the traditionally separate environmental and human rights due diligence. Any thoughts from anyone?
Yeah, I think, and just to clarify, Patrick is bringing up, maybe Annika could take this, because Patrick is bringing up a topic of supply of solar panels, a topic which includes both environmental and human rights issues.
Absolutely. And I think the way when we are doing assessments or audits, we both visit the plants and we do desktop assessments. So if we look at suppliers in Asia, because we don't have our own operations in Asia, we first do desktop assessment, try to figure out sort of what type of company is it, what does the owner structure look like, do they have any adverse media, what type of policies do they have in place, all of those things that you can do, pure desktop things. And that also includes, then we look at all sustainability aspects. It's both environmental as well as social aspect. And then when we do a plant visit, sometimes we first do a visit to generally get a feeling of what is that company like. And then we look at all the different aspects, health and safety, working hours, environmental, permitting, etc. And then you might go into a firm audit at the way. So I would say for us, it's already an integrated part, both on the desktop assessment as well as when we do the site visit. So any representative from Vattenfall that goes over that earlier maybe had primarily focus on quality, sometimes on environmental and some health and safety, they now have sort of a document where they check for all these different things. And the same thing is for the auditors. They look at both quality aspects as well as environmental and social. So for me, I think they are in a way integrated already from the beginning.
Yeah, so it's about company integration, right? To make sure you internally work in a harmonized way. Parul, a question to you then, because as said, I mean, you are recognized as the foremost expert in this area, and I would like to ask you, what are like the common pitfalls that you see companies doing in this regard in terms of human rights?
See, one common pitfall I see, I won't call it a pitfall, but in situations such as ours today, we have two MNCs who are big in their structure and who have understood very well the importance of human rights within their operations. But I think a heads up when it comes to this legislation, and maybe I'm not answering your question to start with, but I want to underline this. We have a huge chunk of small, medium scale enterprises, which actually have a great deal of a large scale of purchase and procurement from high-risk countries, and have not even started looking at supply chain issues. I think we must enroll them into these discussions much more than we have done in the past. Even if they are not directly sort of affected by this upcoming legislation, they are indirectly affected because they may be a part of the supply chain. Another aspect I wanted to underline, when we discuss human rights in the supply chain, we normally refer to the work we are doing with our key suppliers. And we rarely discuss the chain itself. So that in our day-to-day work is one pitfall, that the definition of value chain is not properly done, even in larger MNCs which have a proper policy work done in this area. So define the chain, be honest about the chain. It's not an easy work to reach out to the value chain per se, but remember that the work must not stop at the key supplier. The other issue I wanted to refer to was the previous discussion you had on this mix of legislation and self-regulation, and in particular with an aspect of when we talk about human rights. We have to remember that the situation of human rights in the world has never been as bad as it is today. That's the deal. That's the sort of scene we have in front of us. 4/5 of governments are not able to guarantee human rights for their citizens. That's why this is now falling upon corporations. And on the topics, is it fair? Is it fair to sort of put this responsibility on corporations? Fair or unfair, I can't comment, but the purpose, one part of the purpose of this upcoming legislation is to actually have the companies or corporations ask themselves whether they have the ability to take responsibility if they go into business in these high-risk markets. So that's the gist of this legislation. Do I have the ability? Do I have the strength and the means and the resources and the competence to actually comply my business operations with human rights standards? So I think I just made a lump sort of a reply, Anna. But one pitfall is definitely the inability to actually define your chain, your value chain, when you talk about human rights and supply chain. Most of the times, companies have reporting on the sort of key suppliers. So that's one pitfall, I would say. That be careful in defining your value chain.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Parul. I think we could keep on discussing, Nina, right? It's as we said, it's a complex and multifaceted topic, and it feels that we've just scratched the surface. But I guess the main purpose of today was just to educate ourselves, and I hope that has been achieved.
Yeah, at least. But I still have quite a few questions, so let's see where we can continue the conversation.
But hey, thank you so much to all of you who has listened, participated, and thank you to our wonderful guests who have shared their time and experience with us here today. So with that, Nina, anything else?
Yeah, I think thank you for our partner, Salla. It was such a pleasure to have you finally here in the studio.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Yeah. Yes, and thanks for the audience for all the great questions. I think it was excellent that today we really didn't follow the script, but actually really took the questions from from the audience. So that's how it should be. And looking
Great.
forward to the next Ethics Talk Live.
Thank you to Parul and Annika and Greg as well. And so hope you to
Thank
see.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and see you all in our next Ethics Talk in March.